After an outpouring of letters in support of Carol Ruth Silver, the awards committee of the Alumni Board of Governors found a woman who measured up in every possible way to the criteria established for the public service citation. That is, an individual who has fulfilled the obligations of her education through creative leadership in service that has benefited society and reflected credit on the university. When I was a student living in a dorm complex known as C Group, today their office is across the street from the president's house, we all knew Carol Ruth Silver's name. Those were the days when the country seemed to be at peace. It was after Korea, before Vietnam. Life seemed to be simple, and the Beatles had not yet landed in America. Of course, the world is rarely what it seems. It is lack of awareness of the world that often creates our views of peace and simplicity. But Carol Ruth Silver was aware. When we were just starting to learn the words to We Shall Overcome and singing along with Pete Seeger, Carol Ruth was already a freedom rider, fighting and being jailed for the cause of racial equality. Later, as a member of the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco, Carol Ruth spearheaded progressive legislation such as rent control, limits on condominium conversions, and protection against job discrimination of gays. After 9/11, she founded Afghan Friends Network, which supports schooling for Afghan girls and women, and Master Teachers by Satellite for Afghanistan, which provides access to modern educational technology. Carol Ruth Silver has spent a lifetime being aware and socially active. She never just talked the talk, she walks the walk. She defines service, and the University of Chicago Alumni Association is proud to call her our very own. Please welcome Carol Ruth Silver.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody who can't hear me? Good. Actually, I have already violated the first rule of giving a speech, which is the first question you ask should be answered with a yes. How many of you are here? Yes. All right. So we have established that you are able to raise your hand, and yes, you can give a response. So there will be no laggards here today. I am here to talk to you about why cops say the war on drugs has failed and why prohibition should be repealed again. I am not a cop, nor a former cop, but I am a former corrections lawyer for approximately a year and some in San Francisco up to February of this year. I was employed as the director of the Prisoner Legal Services Program for the San Francisco Sheriff's Office. And my responsibility was to support the sheriff and the jail staff, the deputy sheriffs who walked around with their guns and their badges, and the very substantial number of teachers, social workers, and other support staff that probably the most liberal sheriff, which means the most liberal jailer, the most liberal head of a corrections institution in the United States, had created. But even as such, I was a jailer. I was a part of the corrections staff, and that therefore made me appropriate to join and to be a speaker for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, which is an organization of cops and jailers and probation officers and parole officers and correctional people up and down the scale, including judges and lawyers, but particularly ex-narcotic officers who have been there, been on the line, and done the thing, as they say, walked the bad walk, as well as being involved in the bad talk. And I want to share with you today a number of things. A PowerPoint presentation is ordinarily an outline of what the speaker is going to say. That is not what this PowerPoint presentation is about. This PowerPoint presentation takes advantage of the fact that we as modern Americans are always doing at least two things at once. And since I have, if I didn't ask it before, I will ask it now, I've asked you to turn off your cell phones and not to tweet while I'm speaking, or instant message your friends, or check your email. I'm going to give you something to look at while I'm speaking that you can read while you listen and think about as we go along. These things that will be on this PowerPoint screen are rather show and tell rather than an outline of what I'm going to speak about. So the first question, class, is who wrote this? Right. Whoops, wrong way. There it is. It is a quote from his book, which has been widely quoted, but that is the direct quote. Our president, as did his predecessor, George Bush, took cocaine. I never heard that George Bush admitted to taking marijuana, but he at least admitted to cocaine, as did other people who have had high positions and not been involved in the criminal justice system. And I apologize for the bad quality, but at least you can read the heading and the heading and the picture, and know that it is a nonpartisan kind of thing. People who are involved in doing drugs are at every level of our society. But some of the people who are involved in doing drugs, involved in essentially the same thing that Cindy McCain was involved in, some of those people don't wind up running for president. Those people wind up in jail. This gentleman, Scott Earl, because again, you can't read it very well, is in jail at the present time, 25 years, for selling prescription medications, the same thing that Cindy McCain was involved in. Became addicted to pain medications in the course of a medical procedure and wound up addicted, wound up buying them in the illicit market, was solicited by a beautiful woman in a bar to sell him some of these illicit drugs that he had gotten. And over the course of a period of time, he thought he was developing a romantic relationship. She turned out to be a cop. And now he's doing 25 years, and the judge, in sentencing him pursuant to a mandatory minimum statute which was enacted as part of the so-called war on drugs, said, quote, "I have to express my deep concern about this particular situation. This punishment does not fit the crime. We are not talking about a first or second degree murder. With a great deal of reluctance, I will have to sentence the defendant to 25 years minimum mandatory." So this gentleman is the guest of your state of Florida and has been and will be. Here are some more people from the book of the Families Against Mandatory Minimums. Here's some more. You can't read them very well, but they all are people like you, people like me, who, however, are in jail for doing what Barack Obama did, for doing what Cindy McCain did, for doing what many of us have done, for doing what thousands of college students on this campus and everywhere else have done, only they got caught. So why does this happen? Why are we who are here as analytic friends of society, why are we allowing this to happen? I'd like to just say that in addition to the fact that there are a predominance of African American, Latino, and poor persons in this group, we who are responsible for society have to ask, what is the reason and how do these things happen? Well, one of the things which I can tell you from my experience in poring over the police computer for hours at a time, trying to figure out what to do for one of the inmates in the San Francisco County Jail, most of whom are pretrial detainees, trying to figure out what to do for them and about their charges. Most of them follow this pattern. This is how people who are in this situation are in this situation for possession of drugs. Not sale, not violence, nothing but possession. How can that be, you say? Well, this is how it happens. And I'm not pointing to any one person up there, but this is a pattern that I have observed time and again. Number one, the first thing that happens is, like Mr. Earl, somebody gets busted for drugs. Big drugs, little drugs, doesn't matter. The drug police are out there and they arrest someone, and the district attorney then charges that case. The district attorney charges that case as possession, but in the barter mentality that our criminal justice system has adopted, the district attorney will add another charge, any charge. Possession of a weapon, even though there's no semblance of a weapon. Conspiracy, that's a very useful one in the DA's arsenal, because conspiracy occurs any time that there are more than one person doing anything, and conspiracy is a separate charge, a separate crime, as it were. So they overcharge it, possession and conspiracy, possession and something. Then they come to the defendant. A public defender comes to the defendant and says, I'm your lawyer, and I'm supposed to take care of getting you a fair trial. I'm supposed to defend you against these charges. But you know what? I've got 90 cases, and every one of those cases is essentially the same as your case, and I can only try, at the most, 1 or 2 cases a month. So that's not what he says to the defendant. To the defendant, he says, or she says, you know, if you just plead to one of these charges, we'll get the DA to dispense with the rest of the charges. You'll get credit for time served because you've been in jail now for 3 months waiting for your charges to be done. And you'll walk free, and you'll be on probation. You'll be on probation. What does that matter? What does that matter? Well, what it matters is when you're on probation, you lose all of your civil liberties. You lose the right not to be searched without a warrant. You lose the right not to have to pee in a cup on the order of some cop. You lose the opportunity to go where you want to go or do what you want to do. And you've committed yourself on every probation agreement, every probation plea agreement I've ever seen to, number 1, obey all laws. Well, we all obey all laws, right? Number 2, no drugs, no illicit drugs. Number 3, be subject to search without a warrant at any time. And 4, drug testing. So the person who is defended by a public defender, and I'm not at all challenging public defenders. Some of my best friends are public defenders. The person takes the plea, and now he has what is called in the trade a hammer. The hammer is that hanging over his head is 3 years in state prison on the charge that he would have been sentenced on after the other charge was dismissed if he violates any of the conditions of probation. So the next thing that happens is he's driving down the road and he gets the blue lights in back of him, and here comes a highway patrolman who pulls him over for speeding and says, I'm going to give you a drug test. I'm going to search your car because you're on probation. And guess what? His urine is dirty. So he's not even in possession of drugs at that point. He might have been in possession of drugs a week before. Marijuana lasts about 30 days in your blood. Don't listen to those who say less. And she is going to jail for 3 years. That's how we get people in jail in America so far in excess of what ought to be that we are 7 times as likely, we have 7 times as many people in jail for drugs in America as they do in most EU countries. And you'll find that statistic in the handout on the Portugal experience. But in the book that I asked them to bring and to make available for sale, that is outside, a book by Judge Gray. Judge Gray is a judge in Santa Ana, California, otherwise known as Orange County. Judge Gray's book, Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It, is the Bible of this kind of thing. And Judge Gray is often heard to say, we have so many people in jail, and his statistics are there, for simple possession. And that is how that is why we have those people in there for simple possession. Now, another factor about incarceration of people for these low-level drug possession cases is that incarceration is very cruel. People avoid jail, avoid prison, because it's not nice. And I can speak with some authority. I did 40 days in the Parchman Penitentiary of the state of Mississippi long, long, long ago. And every day that I am awake and thinking, I remember some part of that experience. It is a life-denying experience, like there are some things that are life-affirming. So the first thing about incarceration is that it is unpleasant. The second is that the loss of the future of every one of these people is the loss of potential for our society. Loss of college. They can't get any of those kind of grants that kids get to go to school. They can't get employed because they have a drug conviction. But that's not even the worst of these things. After this, or in addition to this, comes this. This is a book about giving voice to the children of people incarcerated on our drug charges and other charges. But children who have parents in jail often say, I feel all alone in the world. And that is another thing that we're doing. We are making a whole class of people who are totally innocent, the children of the people who are in jail, the children of all these people, male and female alike, are all alone in the world. And that's not the worst, because in addition to the children of inmates feeling all alone in the world, they are all alone in the world. And this is a form that I made up, bless me for doing it, in order to more quickly give women who were in my jail the opportunity to give away their children, the opportunity to choose somebody in their family, somebody that they barely knew, somebody to have the right to send their child to school or not to send them to school, to take them for medical attention or not to take them for medical attention, to give up the rights of that child to be adopted by somebody else. So what we're doing with our drug laws is we're creating a permanent underclass that goes from these people to the children, and they will, and as I'm sure you also know, the statistics on the children of the incarcerated is that they also, and many at a much higher rate than others, wind up themselves in prison. And in our jail in San Francisco, we had 3 generations of one family: father, daughter, and grandchild of the original guy. So, well, let's see. Why do we do this? Let's see what else we've got here. Why do we as a society want to criminalize this behavior? Let's look at this. I'm coming over here to see if you can see any of the text. Oh yeah, it's not too bad. I made this slide with all of its footnotes, even though that's contrary to usual PowerPoint standards, because for this University of Chicago group, I wanted to point out that not only do I have the statistics, but I have all the studies to go with them, and the footnotes show that it's all, the footnotes show that where it comes from. And this page is from this book, Drug War Facts, a book that is available on Amazon.com and available for you anytime you want. And that blown up is just the stats themselves. You can see tobacco, that drug of choice for many people, is responsible for the largest number of deaths. Alcohol, and the 2 numbers there are because they were playing around with whether or not to include traffic deaths caused by alcohol or not. Coming down the list, we come to 17,000 of the deaths in the United States in, I think the last year was 05. See, I don't know how to use this. Okay, over here. And the last of these is that. I don't even have to comment on that. Yes, sir?
No one dies from old age.
No one dies from old age. Everybody dies from old age, but these are deaths before old age. These are deaths mostly of young people. These are deaths from car accidents, motor vehicle accidents, adverse reactions to prescription drugs. That could be an old age problem. But I take your point. I do not think, though, that the point of my statistics are lost on that. So we go on. So why do we do this? Not because this is the large. Why do we criminalize what are called illicit drugs? Not because they are the biggest problem in our lives. Not because marijuana kills people. Why do we do this? So we have to look at the statistics in other places, in Holland, in the EU, even in Russia. under Mr. Putin, there is a policy of what has become known as decriminalization. And the Portugal study that I distributed is one about decriminalization. And that is the policy in the Soviet Union, or what, I'm sorry, pardon me, the Russian Federation. It is the policy not to arrest, not to prosecute, not to punish possession of drugs that are what is considered a personal use. And a personal use amount is considered to be 10 days worth of a drug. So let's not all move to Russia in order to take drugs, but I think it is important that we look at that. Is that why we are doing this? There's another slide which I want to share with you, but I can't find my notes on it, so I'll just share the slide. From chocolates to morphine. Okay, this is a slide about, if you can believe it, a psychologist and drug researcher whose name is Andrew Weil, and who writes as follows: drugs are fascinating because they change our awareness. The basic reason people take drugs is to vary their conscious experience. There are many other ways to alter consciousness, such as listening to music, making music, dancing, fasting, chanting, exercising, etc. Human beings, it seems, are born with a need for periodic variations in consciousness. The behavior of young children supports this idea. Infants rock themselves into blissful states. Many children discover that whirling or spinning is a powerful technique to change awareness. Some also experiment with hyperventilation, followed by mutual chest squeezing or choking, and tickling to produce paralyzing laughter. So there is a set of people who believe, primarily people who have studied the matter, that there's nothing wrong with drugs, and that despite all the laws that have criminalized drugs, that we could just as well leave them alone. And if you will note, the first of the laws, and so next I'm going to deal with how we got to where we are. How did we get to this point where we have this enormous criminal structure, this enormous prison structure, this enormous amount of money, your money, my money, tax money, that is being devoted to this enterprise, the enterprise of criminalizing, incarcerating, and dealing with drugs in this way? So the first thing, and I apologize again that this is not too readable. Let me see how readable it is. The first anti-drug law in the U.S. was enacted, and San Francisco, my town, has been at the forefront of a lot of things. We banned plastic bags before anybody else did. We did gay marriages before anybody else did. We have been in the forefront of a lot of things. Well, we're also, it turns out, we also were at the forefront of racist drug laws. The first anti-drug law in the United States was enacted in San Francisco, called the Opium Den Ordinance, and passed in 1875. Now, those of you who are from California know the story of San Francisco. Until 1849, San Francisco didn't exist. San Francisco was a mission in the up on the bumpy coast of California. And in 49, the 49ers, etc., gold was discovered in the hills, and the world, the entire world, heard of San Francisco, got on their ships, came to San Francisco, and didn't leave. the whole of San Francisco Bay is full of old ships because people got there and the crews deserted and ran up into the hills to try to get rich on gold. Well, San Francisco, therefore, at the time of this passage, 1875, was barely 25 years old as a major city. So you have to look at, so why did this happen? Why did this happen? This happened because of blatant racism. Racism, which raises its head in San Francisco, not in the form of anti-black discrimination, but anti-Chinese discrimination. And I'm trying to see where I have these marvelous quotes that I just found that, hold on just a second. Never mind, I can't find it. So the first anti-drug laws. So what happened? What were the drug laws before 1875? Well, before 1875, patent medicines were being sold all over the United States, all over the world, that contained significant amounts of marijuana, cocaine. I don't think heroin was then available, but very substantial amounts of these patent medicines were being made available, and a significant number of women, because they were mostly patented for women's problems. A significant number of those were being, and women were getting addicted to drugs. So in 1906, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act, which meant that a patent medicine had to disclose on its label all of the things that were in it, and that practically wiped out all of these bad patent medicines loaded with cocaine and other stuff, because when people saw that that's what they were getting, they knew enough not to get it. The market worked, right? Okay. So then, but then something happened. The Harrison Narcotics Act was enacted in 1914, and it was followed shortly after, which made heroin and cocaine illegal and gave federal control of narcotics to the feds, pursuant to the Constitution's clause on commerce, the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, not any of the civil rights type laws. Then shortly after 1914, with the Harrison Narcotics Act, came 1919. Who knows what happened in 1919? Prohibition of alcohol. And who knows what happened with prohibition of alcohol? Well, after, okay? But the prohibition of alcohol led to what? Bootleggers, speakeasies, major corruption, major bad things. It led to the mafia. It led to, or it empowered the mafia. The mafia were little bitty crime gangs, but because they had, to use an economics term, they had a source of revenue which gave them capital to invest in their criminal enterprises. It made them enormously powerful and enormously bad. So what did we do in 1933? We repealed Prohibition. And the same slogan that was used in passing Prohibition, which was save our children from demon rum, was the slogan of the women's groups who got Prohibition repealed. And there are wonderful cartoons of save our children being on the campaign banners. So then something happened. something happened that was very interesting. A man named Harry J. Anslinger became who was a friend of William Randolph Hearst. Everybody knows who he was, the newspaper baron. In those days, we're talking now about 1930, in the 1930s, after Prohibition had ended, William Randolph Hearst, I'm just kind of assessing the ages of this group. It's a mixed group, hard to talk to a mixed group about that kind of history. But anyway, William Randolph Hearst was a newspaper man who was enormously wealthy, enormously important. He controlled newspapers all over the country, and he was a buddy of Harry J. Anslinger. So they believed, both of them, and I'm not going to say whether they believed it for bad reasons or whether they really believed it. And I want to go back to my notes because I forgot to say something. I forgot to say drugs are bad. Drugs cause harm. I am totally on that page. And so is LEAP, the organization that I speak for often, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. We all know that drugs are bad. We all know people who have gotten addicted to drugs and how hard it is to kick drugs. And another little story from my personal background, when I was young, I was not on drugs. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. I didn't do drugs. I was really pretty square. But I wanted to be in San Francisco in a community of people, because I was then living by myself. I wanted to be in a community of people that didn't do drugs, didn't do alcohol. I was willing to give it up on tobacco. And the only place that I could find that was a community of people that didn't do drugs was a drug rehabilitation program called Synanon. And if any of you are old enough to remember Synanon, it was founded as an offshoot of AA, but it quickly became the place to go for somebody who was addicted to narcotics and needed to get off them. And it also became like Delancey Street, or Delancey Street is an offshoot of Synanon, actually. It became a place where ex-cons, narcotics-addicted people, a whole variety of really the bottom of the barrel in our social order were able to go and able to find a way to come back to society. So I joined Synanon, not as a drug-addicted person, but as a person who wanted to live that lifestyle of not having drugs and not having alcohol. And that was the only place that I could find it. That was just a personal little recollection. But in 1937, Harry J. Anslinger, yes, who had been involved in prohibition of alcohol, was testifying before the Senate committee, which ultimately enacted one of the major anti-narcotics laws. And here's what he said. He said, "Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind." We can laugh at that. He said, "You smoke a joint and you're likely to kill your brother." He said, "Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death." Shall I go back to the clicker? No. All right. "The primary reason to outlaw marijuana is its effect on the degenerate races." Nobody's laughing, huh? Okay. Now, here's one. There are one quote from the United States Congress record, the record of proceedings. There are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz, and swing result from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. Now, if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. But unfortunately, you bought the bridge. Your government bought that, and you, therefore, have this. You have the drug laws that constitute the war on drugs. So drugs are bad, drugs cause harm, but the harm that we do by our criminal prohibition of drugs far outstrips the harm of drugs. Drug laws that we are operating under right now were passed because of racism and because of the power of William Randolph Hearst to run Harry J. Anslinger's creeds and lies in his newspaper day after day after day. And I apologize for getting a little out there on it. So I want to quote to you something from Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead said, "A small group of thoughtful people could change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And our drug laws are a result of the corollary of Margaret Mead's saying, which is that a small group of dedicated, wrong-headed people can also change the world to their model. And I don't want to get so far out as to quote who I'm thinking of, but I'm sure you can think of a few examples. I'll give you one other quote. In a book on the Chinese Cultural Revolution called Son of the Revolution, a young boy is asked by his father to write a poem denouncing his mother as a capitalist and as an anti-communist, so that she had already been put away in a prison, and so that he, the father, would be able to avoid a similar fate, which he was not. And this young man, then about 10 or 12 years old, said, "It was not true or just, but it was reality." So that's what we have in America today. It's not true, it's not just, but it is our reality. So I'm going to skip the questions. I had a few questions that I was going to ask the audience. Let me do this really quickly, pardon my bad English. Who of you believe we're winning the war on drugs? Anybody? Okay. Answer, no hands. Okay. Who of you believe that marijuana should be legalized? Oh my goodness, I better go home. Not, including those who think it should be legalized, who of you think it should be decriminalized? Is there anybody left? Anybody who didn't raise their hand? All right. I take that as the opposite view. And I thank you for being willing in this University of Chicago context to go against the crowd. But who of you who said, yes, I think it should be decriminalized or legalized, who of you, and this is a rhetorical question, who of you gave enough priority to this issue in the last year that you took an action, any action, wrote a letter, sent a check, signed a petition? And if you didn't, I'm going to give you a chance. Because we have these drug laws today based on racism, based on a set of people, Anslinger and William Randolph Hearst, who had the opportunity to put their views, which went against the general crowd, because the American Medical Association came to Congress the same year, 1937, that Anslinger testified we don't need laws against marijuana. They're not dangerous. It's not a dangerous drug. Congress passed it anyway. William Randolph Hearst, if you have seen his movie, was very powerful. But there was another element to it, I think, and that was a kind of mass hysteria. A mass hysteria that is similar to witch hunts, similar to the mass hysteria that we all just went through when we were refinancing our houses in the last 5 years, thinking there was no end to the upward spiral in the value of real property. A mass hysteria that, again, an economic example, the tulip mania. Some of you who are economists will remember that, and the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which was a similar kind of thing. So we've had that, and why does it continue on? Why does it continue on? Well, the money. The money that is involved in drug laws, in the, let me see, what do I do? What's the next one? Oh, no, we don't want that one yet. The amount of federal dollars that have been, that were allocated and have been made available is obscene, but beyond that, they have continued the corruption, that the small c corruption in our government, as sheriffs, police officers, even my own wonderful liberal sheriff in San Francisco have adjusted their thinking and their activities in order to get the federal dollars that are made available through the government's drug programs. In Humboldt County, California, a very poor rural area north of San Francisco, which has considerably fewer jobs than people, the local sheriff got a fancy helicopter, and he got new cars, and he got all this wonderful stuff that he could never have had. And you say to him, well, why don't we get that money to repair the roads, to do other things? And, well, that's federal drug money. So federal dollars sprinkled all over the system have raised the ante at state levels, because federal dollars come, but they're never totally free. They're 80% or they're 50%, and the local community comes up with the additional dollars. That's true for prisons. That's true for jails. That's true for all kinds of people, and lots of Americans have a stake in the criminal justice system that we have. And it's not just the Prison Guards Union, but the Prison Guards Union are the biggest lobbyist group in the state of California. It's not just the people who build private prisons. And you may have been appalled by a recent scandal out of, I think it was Texas, where a judge was sending juveniles to a private prison because he'd been paid off by the local prison owner when the juveniles had no reason to be sent to any prison at all. Aren't you appalled at that? Did you write a letter? Did you jump up and down and say, I can't stand this? Why not? All right. But beyond competing for the federal dollars, there's another way in which your local sheriff is getting those fancy cars and all those AK-47s and all the other goodies that police officers love. Forfeitures. Now, how many of you read the Constitution of the United States, and what does it say about search and seizure of property? Nobody should have their property seized by the government, state or federal, without due process of law. Right? So is it due process of law if I'm the sheriff and I come along and you've got a gorgeous Cadillac or some other fancy car that I can sell for $6,000 or $10,000, and I say, I think you've got drugs in your car. And I grab your car, and maybe I don't even charge you with a crime. And I keep your car, and I sell it. Is that due process of law? Well, that's what the forfeiture statute allowed before there was a big reform. So these people, where is my thing? These people are called fear for good reason. They are the people who fear that kind of forfeiture laws. Forfeiture endangers American rights. Can you read it at all? Oh, well, anyway. Forfeiture endangers America's rights. Why do we fear forfeiture? Incredible as it sounds, civil asset forfeiture is a law that allows the government to seize property without even charging you with a crime. And until this group lobbied for a change in the law, and that reform in the law came about in 2000, the year 2000. Until then, the police did not even have to post the charges, give you a chance to respond, do anything other than say, I think you've got drugs. I'm taking your car. Well, if you ever read the Wall Street Journal on a slow news day, you will see pages of lists of seized assets that the government is going to auction off. And those are your assets and my assets and those of thousands of people, some of whom have been charged with crimes and are in jail, most of whom are not. But anyway, so forfeitures are another way in which the war on drugs has eroded the rights of us, the American people, not just the people who are in jail, but, and this is the biggest one of all, the corruption of law enforcement and public officials. The corruption of people in Colombia we are familiar with. We think, well, what can we do about it? They're so poor and they're not up to our standards of education and whatnot. But, and I'm going to read some of this to you because this is really the be-all and end-all should be the be-all and end-all for every one of you to pick up a pen to do something on this issue. A report by the General Accounting Office, this is U.S. Accounting Office, noted several studies and investigations of drug-related police corruption found on-duty police officers engaged in serious criminal activities such as conducting unconstitutional searches and seizures, stealing money and/or drugs from drug dealers, selling stolen drugs, protecting drug operations, providing false testimony, and submitting false crime reports. What does submitting false crime reports mean? It means that somebody's going to go to jail for nothing. Not even for drugs. So, corruption of law enforcement, just one more from that. Mexico's police and armed services are known to be contaminated by multi-million-dollar bribes from the transnational narco-trafficking business. Never mind, Mexico, we all know Mexico is threatened with being a failed state because of the corruption involved in narco-trafficking. In systems, I'm not going to read any more of that. In systems where a member of the legislature or the judiciary earning only a modest income can easily gain the equivalent of some 20 months' salary from a trafficker by making one favorable decision, the dangers of corruption are obvious. From the United Nations International Drug Control Program, Technical Series Number 6, Economic and Social Consequences of Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking. So we not only have made a mess in our own backyard, not only made a mess by incarcerating our citizens, we have made a mess in the world. Because, as again that Portugal study, if you read it, will tell you, the Portuguese were being urged by the American drug people to go back to criminalization, not to allow the decriminalization of narcotics. We are trying to spread our gospel of drug criminalization in places like the EU, where they have already tried it, experienced it, and rejected it. And then, of course, there's the financial burden of prisons. The budget in California now for prisons exceeds the budget for community colleges, and the budget for community colleges is getting cut, but you can't cut the budget for prisons. We have to recognize that we in the United States have created a racist policy based on bad science, created for bad reasons, and it's being continued because of the lack of courage of politicians like me to stand up and focus on this subject. When I was in politics, when I was in elected office in San Francisco, yes, I had a bumper sticker that said, "Stop the drug war," and I was for that. I was involved at some level with NORML. I was involved with getting past the proposition that made medical marijuana not be criminalized in California. But I did not fully understand. I never, until I was working in the jail, I never, until I was looking eye to eye to a woman to whom I was giving a form that would cause her to lose her children, I never fully understood and appreciated and became a spokesperson for changing these really, really bad laws. But I don't want to leave you on a down note. So I will tell you, change is coming. Before we go to that, now one more downer. We've got to do this one. What does the drug policy do in the black community? At the present time, 1/4 of all the young black men in America are either in prison or on parole. 1/4. Most of them were arrested on nonviolent drug charges. In Washington, D.C., the Bush administration's demonstration city, half of all the black men in the city are currently in jail or on parole. More than 90% have arrest records. The same is true of inner-city black men in Baltimore, New York, New Jersey, and Florida. 2/3 of today's black male high school students will be dead, disabled, or in prison before their 30th birthday. The majority will go to prison because of nonviolent drug charges. The majority. For every black man who goes to college, 3 will go to prison. By the year 2000, half of all black men in America will have gone to prison. Most of them will go to prison for nonviolent drug charges. Most of those who go to prison will be released into society again but because they are black men with a prison record, they will be permanently unemployable. So here's the good news. The good news is times are changing. This is a Wall Street Journal article that says, in essence, prohibition should be repealed. The tide seems to be changing. This organization, which I mentioned before, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, has been doing some awesome work in getting this message out. I hope that those of you who picked up a brochure will support it. If you are not in law enforcement, if you are in law enforcement, I hope that you will come out. I think that, like the gay movement, when Harvey Milk and I used to march in marches down Market Street in San Francisco, yelling to the people who were watching us from windows above, these were marches in favor of gay rights, and the people in the neighborhood were mostly gay men, and we would say, come out, come out. If you are in law enforcement, come out for a repeal of prohibition. Every time I've gone to a conference, every time I've had a discussion with a judge, with a prosecutor, with anybody, there's at least a dozen people who say, yeah, I'm in favor of that, but I can't speak out because, after all, I have my position to maintain. Well, in this book, and this was written 10 years ago, Judge Gray wrote to all the judges in the United States, and it's full of quotes from judges, federal judges, state judges, who came out, who said, we need to repeal our prohibition laws. And not just marijuana. It's a cop-out to say, well, we did medical marijuana, therefore, what are you complaining about? I'm complaining about the system. I'm complaining about the entire system. So the Portugal study, the legislature enacted it. And they decriminalized all drugs. Not marijuana not just cocaine, all drugs. And it has been enormously successful. We now have this report was done on the basis of 5 years of studies, and in your thing there, in your handout there, you will see the statistics. And an interesting fact, at the end of this study, after he had written it, Mr. Greenwald, who wrote it, sent specific questions to the DEA, to the United States Department of, I've got the name wrong, I've got the old name, but to the Drug Enforcement Office of the United States of America. He never got any response. None. Okay? So it stands, and that's kind of the test, isn't it? If you say to somebody, you've got green on your nose, and they don't say, oh no, it's okay, I went to a face painting or something, it's not what you think it is, then you have a right to go and say, yes, it is what I think it is. So the good news is that change is coming. The EU is decriminalizing de facto all drugs. That is where we are headed in Europe. Portugal is the most articulate about it, but it's happening. The good news is also that The Economist has called for legalization. So did the Wall Street Journal. I guess those guys talk to each other. But prohibition has failed. Legalization is the least bad solution. And this is a wonderful editorial. It's not an article, it's an editorial. This is the people that run The Economist. They never give their names. But anyway, they came out editorially and noted that they've been saying the same thing for a very long time. Legalization is the least bad solution. Personally, I agree with this. I do not agree that decriminalization is the best solution, but it may be the best solution that we can get at the present time. However, as a person from the University of Chicago who believes in Milton Friedman's free economy, free market economy. How many of you are Milton Friedman fans? All right. Every one of you should be for decriminalization, for legalization. Let the market take care of that. I'm watching my time. Thank you. And finally, let's see. Well, I have a lot of other things to say, but I only have 5 minutes left. 4 minutes of that I want to take for questions. 1 minute I want to take for, this class is almost over, so I'm going to give you your assignment. And your assignment is to read this petition, which is, it's hard to read, but there are copies of it around. This petition was signed by Milton Friedman, signed by George Shultz, signed by the mayor of Baltimore, signed by the sheriff of San Francisco, signed by lots of people a long time ago, and now has become even more important as we have Senator Webb's bill in committee to have the United States take an 18-month in-depth study of every aspect of our criminal justice system, including, in the words of Senator Webb, drugs are on the table. So if you have an opportunity, please read the petition, sign the petition, send it in, support the legislation that Senator Webb has put forth. Secondly, give this problem 15 minutes of your leisure browsing on the internet once a month. That's not a lot to ask, is it? 15 minutes. And I think that if you browse, whether it's drugs or any of these issues that I have raised or any of the stuff that you'll find in the handouts, you will fairly soon begin to acquire that sense of outrage, which I hope you will eventually get. There is something called Cliff Schaefer's Drug Library, www.druglibrary.com. This, by the way, is the other side of that resolution for reform. We listed some of the hotshot signatories: Milton Friedman, George Shultz, John McNamara, Joe McNamara, former chief of police of San Jose, and so forth. And, okay, so browse it. Send a contribution to any of the organizations fighting our drug laws if you are so mindful and if you have the financial capability. And last, do it for yourself and for the teenaged grandchild who, as we speak, is thinking about, if not trying, some mind-altering experience. Do it for the others. If not now, when? Thank you very much. Do you want to take questions?
Are there any questions? One there and one here.
Thanks so much, especially for bringing race into it so clearly. And I didn't realize how long racism has been involved in this. I was particularly interested in the 1937 and Anslinger. I wasn't aware of that. And I think that's one of the interesting things is, what interests me is how it's different in the North versus the South. I mean, this is obviously a national effort. Racism in the South is different than racism in the North. But anyway, I'm interested in that, but if you don't have any details, that's fine. I just also want to say Glenn Greenwald, I think, is excellent writer on legal issues. And one other thing, I've heard Milton Friedman talking to a bunch of students 10 years ago. When a student asked him how he would reduce crime in America, expecting to hear something about deregulation, he said decriminalizing drugs. It was just an immediate response. But thank you.
Did everybody hear the question? No? Okay. That's all right. The question is there any difference in the racism involving drugs in the South and in the North? To the best of my knowledge, there is not, because what we're talking about is a federal policy. We're not talking about the constitutional federalism. which those of us who are promoting decriminalization or legalization are promoting, that is, the rights of individual states to do something different. It's all federal drug policy driven. And the other thing was that Milton Friedman was heard by this gentleman to essentially say the same thing. You want to reduce crime in America, change the drug policies.
We have
one other question, yeah.
Very quick question. Is there a drug mafia supporting these?
Is there a drug mafia? Is there a, well, you know, that's a very good question. Who in America stands up for the present laws? Who in America says, we're winning the war on drugs, we should continue doing exactly what we're doing? The police guards union, the police officers union, the prison guards union, the people who have private prisons, the people who are making money off of this horrible, terrible system that we have created. They didn't create it, but boy, oh boy, they've got a gravy train, and they're not about, and they have lots of rationales. You know, their rationale is, well, these are bad people. We know they're bad people because we got them in jail and they were very disruptive. Well, you'd be disruptive too if you were in jail and you thought you shouldn't be there. That's a tough one. All right, I'll take another question. One more, last one.
Could it be that these people feel that if, as bad as it is now, if drugs were not illegal, it would be even worse?
Yes, that is the only argument for keeping things as they are and pouring more money into it. If you believe that, then that is something that you should study, but having started with that proposition, because I kept asking Cliff Schaefer, who runs this drug library, where is the website or where is the set of studies that say we should continue on doing exactly what we're doing? And the only thing that I find is screeds. I find articles by, not studies. There are no studies that say that. There are, on that website, you will find a list of all of the commission studies that have ever been made on this subject, and they all say, do not criminalize drugs. We have to end. Thank you all very much. I'll be glad to take other questions up. Thank you.